model minority myth is that we as a minority are model citizens. And the way that I would describe it is that typically the things that are stereotypical of foreigners that come from Asian countries tend to be hardworking, are really smart, good at math, all these sorts of things, willing to do jobs that other people aren't willing to do, and don't complain. And I think that's a big part of it, is that a lot of Asian Americans, throughout history, have made a point to have their voices heard, but not often enough. And it's not the topic of lots of civil rights movements when we think about those types of things. And so I would almost say that the model minority idea really buys into this narrative that Americans are doing us a favor by giving us a place to work, giving us a place to live and have a home, and that we don't have any real reason to complain about it because of the circumstances that we might have came from.
Like from what I learned in school, there's not much. I've never learned much about the Philippines.
That we work hard and fast and we're taking all their jobs, so they make an act to limit Asian immigrants from coming to the U.S. There are a lot of times where Asians, such as Filipinos, were lynched because white males believed they were taking all their women.
Those who are in power get to write the narrative. And so the history books that we read, those who write what is emphasized in classrooms are those who are not minorities, those who identify themselves to be the majority Americans. And so it's not surprising that I don't know a lot of Asian American history because it's not focused on. It's not their history.
Well, my parents were not first generation. They were immigrants. They came here as immigrants. My whole family were all immigrants except for myself. I was the only one who was born here. And the hardships that they faced was finding jobs here while they were trying to earn their citizenship. And they had to keep a low profile because if people knew, they were afraid of being ratted out to the US government and being deported.
Both my parents at the time were working 2 jobs. They weren't really able to take care of me. After I was born, we had our neighbor babysit me in our small apartment. It's not even an apartment, it's like a house that's split into 2. And we would have a lot of roaches on our carpets and not a lot of space. I think my crib was in the living room. When my second sister, Bejo, was born, my parents took us back to China so our aunt could raise us for an entire year while they worked their butt off to buy an actual house. So they did do that, and then I think growing up, I don't think I remember my parents that much because they were always working. So my grandma raised me and my sister, and then when my youngest sister Bella was born, she was lucky. We were already set. We had a good house. My dad didn't have to work multiple jobs anymore. She found a decent job at Safeway, and that had insurance. So before she was born, we had a really, really bad experience with the dentist and the insurance because low-income families usually don't get really good health care.
My parents are immigrants. They both came here. My dad came here in the 60s to go to grad school, and my mom came here in 1972 when she got married. I can't speak necessarily to their experience and the types of things that they endured, and I think that it's interesting in that, like, sometimes my parents' generation, the things that I would consider offensive, like questions that I would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they asked you that, my parents don't find those things offensive. To them, they're just like, well, you know, we're different. We are different. Like, people have questions. People didn't know. They kind of not make excuses. They just have a lot more, they're a lot more understanding and generous to mainstream America than I think I am or people in my generation are.
Things that they don't understand, they would ask me to type up everything in Google Translate to show them in Chinese. And sometimes it's really long and I have to type for like hours.
My parents would start a sentence in English and they'd finish it in Tagalog, and then I'd have to ask them again what they said, and then they'd get mad at me for that just because I didn't understand what they were saying.
My family does speak Tagalog at home, but they do speak English because they like to practice it. I personally don't, because I was never really taught as much, but I do understand most of what they say. So when they speak Tagalog to me, I speak English back to them.
Like when I was a kid, people would come over and they would be like, oh, it smells like curry in your house. Is your mom cooking? It's like, that's just the way our house smells.
Right now, I feel like a lot of us are learning to kind of decolonize our minds, I would say, and embrace who we are. But when I was younger and I was in the car and we were going to a wedding or a prayer and I was wearing an Indian outfit with a bindi on my head, I would never want to step out of the car to go get a card or go to the grocery store right quick. Like, that made me feel uncomfortable. One time in kindergarten, I had henna on my hands and some kids asked me if that was like poop on my hands, and I was just like, what? Like, that makes no sense. And a lot of times people say things like, oh, what's that red dot on your forehead? Or they made fun of me for having curly hair or having bushy eyebrows. And now suddenly all of these things are trendy. And I'm like, it's just weird to see people taking part of my culture while also putting it down at the same time, you know?
Didn't go by my full first name until, well, like starting in 6th grade, which is kind of like when you begin to like be embarrassed about stupid things. Like, I went by my nickname, which is a lot shorter and easier for white people to say, until I went to, until I graduated from college.
I grew up in a typical family where my primary guardian is African American. He was my step-grandfather, and you know, my biological parents had divorced, and then I had gone into the care of my step-grandfather. And so I basically grew up American. I started going to American schools. I did all those things. And so because of that, I never questioned my identity as an American. I kind of just assumed that I was. The interesting thing is, because I'm a dreamer and because I didn't actually become an American until much later in my life, you know, I had a huge identity crisis in terms of whether I was Korean or whether I was Korean American, because technically I was Korean, but my cultural upbringing said that I was Korean American. The government said that I was Korean. And when I flew to Korea to visit my parents, and I was coming back to America afterwards, after getting my green card, I was stopped at customs and I was held at the airport for about 5 hours for them to make sure that I was, you know, that my green card was legitimate. And I had lots of thoughts in those 5 hours. One was, if I was denied to go back into the United States, the only place that I'd ever called home, I don't identify myself as a Korean person, just strictly Korean. And so if they send me back to Korea, that's not home for me.
I was definitely ashamed and embarrassed of being Indian, being different. I definitely grew up in an area that was majority white, and it definitely influenced how I saw myself. I tried not to stick out. I tried to not draw attention to the fact that I was Indian. If teachers would ask me questions about India, Indian culture, I would usually just be embarrassed and try not to draw attention to myself?
Not really. I wasn't really ashamed of my culture or of my race, but I was kind of ashamed of not being enough of it. Like I was too whitewashed because I was born here, and I don't even speak my own language, so I was more ashamed of that I wasn't Filipino enough.
And when you speak a different language, people want to assume you're talking about them when I'm just communicating with my mother. Like, I shouldn't be ashamed of these things, and I shouldn't have to stop myself from being who I am and expressing my culture in the fullest potential.
There's different reasons and different ways that people came to the United States or immigrated. Like some people came as refugees, some people came as college students, some people came with a lot of money and support, some people came with nothing. And I think that a lot of times we just kind of tend to lump everyone together. And if people don't fit into the model minority concept, then they're kind of like cast aside and not necessarily forgotten, but maybe ignored.
To sit, discolor all the worries, find the right exit.
I think both with Asian men and Asian women, being submissive is something that is stereotypical of people who are Asian American or of Asian descent.
I think that just like a lot of times in my classes, they'll be like, oh, of course, like, who got the highest score? Of course it was so-and-so. She's Asian, or he's Asian. Of course he did the best. Oh, of course, let me borrow your math homework, so-and-so, because you're Asian. And it's kind of like a halfway joke, but it's not a joke because it's, again, perpetuating these stereotypes. It's like, oh, maybe I didn't get a perfect score. Is that okay with you? Like, what's gonna happen?
Well, the number one thing usually happens in school is like, oh, kids will tease you and think you're good at math, so you should help them with their homework, and then I would shoot them down really fast because I'm not good at math and they're probably gonna fail if they copy my homework.
I was considered a know-it-all, but it wasn't because like I knew the things on my own and because I studied. It was just because I was Asian.
We're learning just like you guys are, and we're all learning at the same pace, and race has nothing to do with how fast you understand something.
There's like an expectation or a bar that's so high that people think, oh, just because Asians are supposedly smart that you should do this, you're able to do this, but we can't go to those expectations or stereotypes that you assume.
I see like ads on like websites as like they stereotype Asian girls as like sex icons, and that makes me feel like a little uncomfortable.
I feel like a lot of people say that like Indian men are terrorists and that they should feel uncomfortable as somebody's walking in with a turban. Like if you're Sikh, then you can't. A lot of times Sikh people are discriminated against, and because they're wearing turbans and they look a certain way because they have long beards and turbans, people think that they're dangerous.
I guess I've never really thought about it, but I guess maybe subconsciously I think of it too, like, I'm Asian, I think I have to do this because I have to like get high grades just because I'm Asian. Like, I don't know if it's because I'm Asian or if it's just because of who I am, but I feel like being Asian has a role to play with it.
I personally don't eat cat or dog, but yeah, a lot of people assume that.
Because when there's this model minority thing placed on you, yeah, why wouldn't you want your children to achieve? Why wouldn't you want your children to be materially successful? Why wouldn't you want your children to be looked upon as like ideal? But when it becomes this, not so much as an ideal as like an expectation, and anyone who goes outside of that expectation is deviant, that's when it becomes a problem, because then you're placing another label like, oh, he or she doesn't fit the mold, he or she is doing what's not expected, they are bad.
They may not seem life-threatening or anything like that. I feel like they do cause a lot of mental illnesses. A lot of times parents and our peers around us push us to the extent of us feeling like we might just be working machines. I feel like a lot of times a lot of Asian students are put under this kind of like pressure just to be like a perfect student, and it gets at a lot of people's mental health if you're always being told you need to be a certain way. Just like if you're told you need to look a certain way or act a certain way, if you're not that thing that everyone's always telling you to be, it puts a lot of mental strain on you.
I've met plenty of Asians and Asian Americans that don't consider themselves academically smart or they are academically successful, and having that stereotype placed on them could make them feel like really, it could just make them feel angry, I guess.
There are many different kinds of people out there. We're not all smart, we're not all intelligent, we're not all amazing at everything. 'Cause I can't make you change.
I have really small eyes, and like they're like, can you even see or something?
Well, like the most common one would be either like chink or Jap or something like that.
This is more recent. I was at my job the other day at the Reach Ashland Youth Center, and I was working, and one of the girls told me that I should be sent to ISIS.
It's just kind of a lot of questions that I find irritating, like why do you wear a red dot? Why do you dance so much at weddings? Do you have to have an arranged marriage? Those are the questions that come from outside, but there's a lot of stereotypes that are enforced from within the community, like, oh, you should be married at a certain age, oh, you should have X number of children, oh, your children should be doing these kind of activities, oh, you should live in this town, oh, you should be in this career field.
Being a Chinese American, they always ask, usually first is, what are you, or where are you from? And usually I would say Oakland, and they're like, no, like, what are you?
I said I was Asian today in class, and some kid was like, no, you're not. And I was like, I'm Indian. They're like, okay, you're Indian. I was like, India is not a continent. Yeah, it's very interesting to see like people try to say what you are and what you're not.
When I hear like those sounds that they make when they try to repeat our Chinese, it's just like, we could teach you.
I have a cousin who is working in Sicily right now on a military base, and some of the comments that she gets from, not from the actual like Sicilians who live there, but the Americans who she works with and lives with on the base, it's like they refuse to say her name because they say they can't pronounce it. They will like not include her on emails because they're like, oh, I couldn't remember how to spell your name. That kind of thing where it's like, what generation, what decade are we living in?
I think a lot of my friends didn't really recognize the severity of the things that they were saying. One of the most common things, one of the most common kind of like nicknames that I had when I was growing up was illegal. Because I am a dreamer. I came here, I was born in Korea, and I came here at the age of 3 illegally. I stayed in America illegally. And so, you know, I wasn't particularly ashamed of that fact. It's kind of just who I was, it's what I identified as. And it became a label for my friends to kind of, to use for me. And I use the phrase for me because a lot of my friends were still very good friends right now. And I don't think that they were particularly against me. But I do think that there was a lack of understanding in the severity of what that word and constantly calling me that might mean and the implications of what that might mean.
I'm Hindu, but that's kind of different in America to not be Christian or Catholic, especially in my community. It's not necessarily something that's heard often. So kids would tell me things like my God wasn't real, or that I was going to be sent to hell, and some very intense things, and I was only in elementary school hearing these things. One of my best friends from elementary school told me that I was going to be sent to hell just because I didn't believe in Jesus, and she didn't even know if I did or not, you know? And that was different for me to hear because personally I grew up in a household where one of my grandmothers was Muslim, my other grandmother was Christian, and my two grandfathers were Hindu. So it was interesting to see that something that wasn't that big of a deal to my personal family seemed to be making others look differently at me.
I personally have always put hard work and time into my schoolwork and studies because that's what my mom wants me to do and she wants to have a better future for me. So I've always done that, but people always assume I'm just smart and I'm kind of rude for not like sharing my knowledge with other people. But if you don't want to put in the hard work, then that's your fault.
I feel like some of the discrimination is internal from within the community, like, oh, you're an Indian girl, you shouldn't live alone, you should live with your parents, or oh, you're an Indian girl, you should be searching for a husband, or oh, you shouldn't, why are you pursuing teaching, or why are you interested in the arts? Like, that's fine for a hobby, but that's not the kind of career that we do. So I think a lot of it just comes from inside the community.
I feel like every time, and still till this day, I don't bring my school lunches I don't bring a school lunch all the time because it smells so strong. Like, my food smells so strong and like when I was little, kids would point that out all the time, like, oh, your food smells gross. Okay, first of all, it smells seasoned. Learn what salt is, learn what garlic is. It's great. My food does not smell bad, okay? It smells good, it smells delicious. You should try some. When I was younger, I feel like kids would look at my meals and just be like, what is that? Or assume everything I eat is curry. Just curry everything. And I'm just like, bro, there's such a large diaspora of Indian cuisine to try, and it's not just all curry. So go eat some Indian food, you'll like it.
When I've traveled to other parts of the country, sometimes I've faced like just weird questions. Like, I went to Florida once for a teaching conference, and the other people there, like the other teachers, it's like it was like going to a different planet. They were like, oh, are you gonna have an arranged marriage? And like, oh, you're vegetarian? What's that? Tell me about why you're vegetarian. And just things where here in the Bay Area, I feel like people have a lot more exposure to diversity and they don't ask those kind of questions anymore. But it just made me aware of like, oh, in other parts of the country, it's not like that.
I feel like people think we're more privileged than everyone else sometimes. People don't necessarily see our struggles, which is fine if you don't understand our struggles. Nobody's going to understand your personal struggle. But there's a lot of things when you come to this country that are placed on you and expected of you or thought of you, and they hold you back just as much.
So I've had the other experience, like this concept of being fair-skinned, especially for women in South Asian culture and Asian culture in general, is ridiculous, and it's rampant, and it's like a leftover remnant from colonialism, and it's disgusting, and it needs to stop.
The lighter-skinned Filipino you are, the higher chance of getting more attention and praise or promotions or chances or opportunities you get compared to a darker-skinned Filipino. It'll just be considered the outsider, the outlier, or the background characters, if that makes sense.
Like all over Asia, you'll find people like buying these skin lightening creams. In India, the big one is called Fair and Lovely. But I know that like even companies that sell in the US, like Clinique, in Asian countries, they'll sell like skin whitening creams where they wouldn't sell that here, but over there it's like a huge business.
I'm not dark skinned, but I'm brown. But I have cousins who are dark skinned, and even me, like, our mothers would tell us things like, don't go out in the sunlight and stay inside during the summertime, or don't go swimming for too long, you're gonna get dark and stuff. And I think that's like ridiculous to hear. Now it's something I don't care about, but for the longest, when wintertime came and I had light skin, I was happy about it, and I really was happy about it.
Aunties will comment like, oh, you're so white, wow. Or like my daughter, she's very light-skinned for whatever reason. I don't know, genetics. But people will be like, oh my gosh, she's so cute, she's so fair. It's like, I don't want her to hear that. I don't want her to internalize that there's some kind of like privilege or like you're a better person because of the way that your skin is. Like, that's ridiculous.
My mom would say things like, oh, you're so fair right now. And it's not like she knew any better. These are beauty standards that were placed into her as she was young, and she's light-skinned, so she probably thinks the same way. I don't think it was anything that was like going to stop her from thinking we were like beautiful, but she definitely praised us more when we were at our more light-skinned selves.
Like, for example, there's some model and photo shoots that have been done even in magazines like Indian Vogue, where they'll like Photoshop the models to make them lighter, and it's just perpetuating. Again, I feel like a lot of these stereotypes, it's like we're taking that model minority myth and running with it. We're like, we will stereotype ourselves harder than anybody else. Like, we can out stereotype any other group.
If you don't understand how everything is working to put you in this place, if you don't understand the systems that are placed against you, it's like a big setback. And if you don't have those resources to necessarily understand why are we struggling right now, why are we being held back, why am I not being paid as much as I should be for a job that is really hard, then you know it's not your fault. And I feel like that's something that us as like first generation have to like explain to our parents and fix.
I feel like Asians should be proud of who they are. They should be proud of their culture and their parents' culture while they're growing up, while they're living their life, because it's a part of their identity. I feel like you should never be ashamed of who you are. You should embrace that, because a lot of times that's what makes you different, and it makes you maybe stand out from the crowd, and that's a good thing.
Is my identity shaped by my own experiences, or is my identity shaped on what people want to label me as?
I think I want to be treated as an individual instead of something that they think I am.
I'm American, I'm also, you know, Indian and Fijian, I'm Asian. I love it.
The more we talk about these things, the more we can kind of put the nail on the coffin of these stereotypes and just move on to something else.
You know, even if it is a positive stereotype, you know, it is a stereotype and it's generalizing a group of people.
It does a lot more damage than good.
We need to speak up about it more and let other people know that it's okay to be who you are.
Acknowledging one group's struggle doesn't negate the struggle of another group. So you can't say like, my pain is deeper than your pain, my pain is valued more than your pain. We have to be conscious and listen to each other.
When you said cooking videos, I was like, it's housewife research.
Yeah, the housewife research. I am a desperate housewife. Get me on that TV show.
At the, what is that place called? Plains.
That was when Bella was born. Yeah.
Damn, girl. I said mention me, not shade me. I'm just kidding.
Or I'm just stupid, one of those. Or both. But yeah, go on.
Both, yeah.
I just read this really interesting article. I read a lot of articles. It was a...
I don't think I can do that.
Do you have something to say? 'Cause the feelings in my mind cannot escape. Would you ever take me? 'Cause my heart is all I carry. The feelings in my mind I cannot explain. Far away, this place